I know that everybody's very busy, so I'll go ahead and get started. It is 12 noon Central Time here in the United States. My name is Jay Simcox, as I mentioned a second ago. Welcome to Assessing the Health of Your SharePoint Farm, or more simply put, how well do you know your SharePoint farm? Brought to you by Summit 7 Systems out of Huntsville, Alabama, and Acceleratio out of Croatia, the creators of SP.Kit. As I mentioned, my name is Jay Simcox. I'm a senior consultant with Summit 7 Systems. I'm also an instructor with MindSharp. I live in Huntsville, Alabama, in the southeastern United States. A little bit about me, I'm a co-author on the SharePoint 2013 Administrator's Pocket Guide. I've got a number of certifications. I just recently got my MCSE SharePoint 2013. I am also an MCT, and I have some legacy SharePoint certifications as well. In addition to my SharePoint certifications, I'm an MCSE 2000 with security specialization and a bunch of CompTIA stuff as well. I've been working with SharePoint for about 12 years, a lot of different positions. I've been a consultant for the last 5 years with Summit 7. Before that, I was a farm administrator, site collection administrator for about 7 years. A lot of experience in DoD, state, local education here in the States. I've also been teaching for about 7 years. I've been teaching for MindSharp on and off for the last 2 or 3. And before that, I did 5 years at a small college here locally in Huntsville, teaching the hardware part of the A+ course. At the bottom of the slide, there's my contact information. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to email me and ask, or hit me on Twitter at jsimcox, or my alter ego at SPHoneyBadger. I will respond to both. A little bit about Summit 7. We are a Microsoft Gold partner located in Huntsville, Alabama. We are Gold in Cloud Productivity, Collaborative Content, Digital Advertising. We are a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. Ben Curry is one of the co-owners. He's a Microsoft MVP, and we've made a number of the really high-level lists generated by CRN and KM World and Inc. 5000. We do work in about 31 states as well as across the world. We've got some, we do some work in Qatar for one of our customers. We've done some work in Europe. We have 10 Microsoft partner competencies. We've published over 30 books between the lot of us here, and we do have an office dog whose name is Cody, and he pretty much has run of the place here. With me today from Acceleratio, I have Sarah Clarich. Sarah, if you'd like to take it and talk about Acceleratio for a few minutes, who you are.
Okay, great. Hi guys, this is Sarah. So I'm Customer Success Manager at Acceleratio. I'm going to present our company in just a few words. So Acceleratio is the creator of SP.Kit. You'll hear more about it here today. So we're a software development company based in Zagreb, Croatia, in Europe. We have more than 6 years of experience behind us, and we create basically innovative solutions which are focused on SharePoint, Office 365, Windows Server, and Citrix technologies. We're also a Microsoft Golden Partner and Citrix ready. So by now we've gathered more than 2,000 customers. Please, Jay, turn the slide. Okay, around the globe. So they're spread across 50 countries worldwide. As you can see, there are some pretty big names here. Some of them are featured here on this slide, and each and every of them are using at least one of our tools. As I mentioned, we created the SP.Kit, the tool for administration and management of SharePoint. You'll hear more about it later today. There's also CloudKit 365 for administration of Office 365 and SharePoint Online, and SysKit, our new rebranded tool, which is awesome for monitoring SharePoint servers and basically any other Windows Server workstation or any other system you might have in your environment. So here are just some of the support and contact info for you guys. You can, if you're interested, you can try the SP.Kit and download it from our site. There are 30 days free trial for you, and if you have any questions, we'll be answering them later today, and also feel free to contact us at support@acceleratio.net. We'll always be ready to answer all your questions and feedbacks, hear feedbacks or anything else. So I'm just going to wrap this up and let Jay continue with this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that.
Okay.
All right. little bit of housekeeping before we get started, our agenda. Then we'll talk about the assessment process. That's really the focus of today's webinar. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other benefits of SP.kit, what I call configuration what, because when I ask that question for most of my customers, that's generally the answer I get. We'll talk about migrations and moving on up, and then we'll give you 10 takeaways after we do a demo, and then we'll close today with some questions and answers. If you have questions, if you'll type them into the chat box, we'll answer those at the end of the session. Anything I don't get to by the end of the session today, I'm going to cover in a blog probably next week. So from a housekeeping perspective, we are recording today's webinar. It will be available for download afterwards. Everybody who is attending today can get a discount of 30% off of SP.kit and Summit 7 Anchor Point support. Anchor Point support is our SharePoint, think of it as SharePoint help desk. We're here to help you with pretty much any problems you may be having in your systems, and just by attending today you can get 30% off of those services as well as 30% off the purchase of .kit, which is really a pretty good deal. Contact sales at summit7systems.com for more information on that. We will be randomly choosing a winner at the end of the session that will get a free license of .kit and 16 hours of Anchor Point support. That winner will be will be notified by email. Right now your odds are pretty good of winning. It looks like about 1 in 30. As I mentioned a minute ago, I've reserved some time at the end of the hour for questions and answers. I'll do my best to answer all of them in that time. That may be difficult. Put your questions in the chat window and we'll respond to them. Answer as many possible, and then I'll recap them on my blog next week. Excuse me. We'll also be making the slide decks available for download as well. All right. So the first thing we talk about is the assessment process. And from a consulting perspective, we do assessments generally for 3 reasons. We do them for health and usage. We do them for discovery because we do have customers who are not always aware of everything that's in use in their SharePoint farm. And then we do them for pre-migration. We need to know what we're migrating, exactly what we're migrating. And a lot of people don't think about a lot of the really remote pieces of SharePoint that we take for granted just work. Workflows, for example, when we move workflows, if we don't move the workflow history and the workflow list or the workflow task list with that workflow or with that instance of the workflow, then those will break. And that can be a problem if you're doing a content-only migration, right? So if you're just moving content and you say, well, I'm going to move this document library, and that document library has several hundred workflows that run, and you don't move the workflow history list and the task list with it, those workflows will cease working, or they will not work until you move those and reassociate them in some way, shape, or form. When we're doing a database attach, that's really not that big a deal, right? But when we start talking about doing content migrations, it becomes more important. So in the assessment process, one of the first things I do is we will talk about what we look at and what we document or note as part of the assessment process. And I'm actually going to, when we get to the demo, I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of essentially what I do from an assessment perspective. Then we'll take a look at the old way of doing things. It was a very manual process. And to give you a little history about how I got hooked up with .kit, I've actually started at Summit 7 about 5 years ago. One of my first assignments was to go out and do an assessment of a farm for a customer. And of course, the first thing I asked was, well, what are we assessing and why? To which the question was, well, we're not really sure. We know that they want to know what they have in their farm. And that's how our assessment process was really born. We started outlining what we wanted to capture. And as we started looking at it, we realized that this was going to be an incredibly manual process, and I started looking for tools to address that. And I actually found .kit in 2009, not long after they'd come out, and really liked what I found from a documentation standpoint for the farm. A lot of customers we go in and talk to, when you ask them about their farm configuration, they generally can't give it to you, or it's not as complete as they probably need it to be. And we start looking at what we're gathering in an assessment process. The screenshot you see right now should show you a good cross-section of the things that we touch on, and we've divided it into 5 buckets. We look at our SharePoint farm, and we look at a lot of the things in the farm. We look at things like managed accounts and the services on the server. What servers are in the farm, how many web applications we got, what kind of web applications are they? Are they extended? Have those web applications been extended? We look at our list of site collections, how many, how big, who are the administrators, who are the owners. We identify our farm administrators, and we go out and look at our content databases. Content databases are particularly important because we need to know if we're doing a database attach, we'll need to know things like how big those databases are, how many site collections are in that database, what's the max number of site collections. Maybe the customer is looking at making some architectural or some logical architecture changes, and they want to move things around, or they want to move a site collection, existing site collection, into its own database. We can take a lot of those considerations out of the information gathered around that. We want to know what the health analyzer says about the farm. You know, the health analyzer uses SharePoint rules to tell you things like, you know, the SharePoint farm administrator accounts in the local administrators group, disk size, or there's not enough memory on the server. Distributed cache is not configured correctly for this particular farm in the case of a 2013 farm. So we want to look at those health analyzer issues and identify any that can impact our migration. Or if we're doing a usage and health analysis, we want to call those out so that we know that those are health issues that need to be addressed in the farm so that they can be fixed and the farm will perform better. From a web application level, we look for customizations. We look for large query windows. You know, those things may not get automatically moved if you're doing a content migration. In the case of a database attach, a lot of those settings will transfer, but in the case of a content migration, they won't. So you have to know what those are. Where are my log file locations? Where are my log files at? What are my user policies? Do I have managed paths? Do I exceed the number of recommended managed paths by Microsoft? We look at service application specific settings, especially services that can be upgraded, things like the BCS. We look at search and the managed metadata service. We want to make sure that all those things come over effectively and efficiently. What features have been installed or deployed? Are there custom features? Are there custom solutions in the farm? Those are things that we need to know. From a site or site collection structure, this is where we start looking at things at the site collection level, and this is where we can get into some things that are really important from a migration standpoint. Things like custom content types. Is it an enterprise content type? Was it developed at the site? Is there any custom branding or master pages? Where are the workflows and the associated lists? Where are my workflow associations? What about permissions? Do I have item level permissions? Do we have any orphans in this particular site or site collection? We look at the files. How many files are in this particular site collection? What types of files are they? Are they AutoCAD and very large? Is it lots of small Word documents? How long have those documents gone untouched or been idle? What I call stale. We want to know if we have lookup columns. Lookup columns can be really important if you're doing a content migration and you're moving just the lists. If I move a list that has lookup columns and I don't move the lists that are associated with it, then I've got a problem post-migration. Is there any kind of in-place records management? Then we get to the piece that everybody forgets about, SQL. There are a lot of pieces of SQL that can be evaluated and adjusted to make your SharePoint farm perform better. The biggest one I can think of off the top of my head is the auto growth settings directly within SharePoint. Most of us are not SQL people. I know that I'm not. I've had a couple of SQL classes. I know enough to be inherently dangerous, but I don't generally have a lot of experience with things like maintenance plans and things of that nature, but I do know that if I have a 10 megabyte document and my auto growth settings are set for the database to grow by 1 megabyte at a time, then that means if I upload that 10 meg PowerPoint presentation, that database has to grow 10 times just to accept that single document. If I'm doing a bulk upload of say 10 documents and it's 50 megs, then it has to grow 50 times. That's a huge performance hit, right? I want to know where my data and log files are at. My data and log files should be on separate drives. They are often not in most of the environments I look at. We look at doing a content migration. You might want to make sure that the max size of the database is more than the size of the content you're going to be moving into the database so that it doesn't have to grow. If you're running a 2010 form, the max degree of parallelism is almost assured to be set to 0. In 2013, it is a requirement that that's set to 1. It handles the threads that deal with SQL threading as related to SharePoint. Are your databases encrypted? That's a big one. You can't move an encrypted database unless you have the encryption key to go with it. What's the security? What are the security settings? Bear with me, I've had a technical difficulty here. Sorry about that. I am back somehow. Can you hear me? Current. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Technical difficulty. My laptop freaked out on me for a minute. Should be able to see my monitor now, and we're back where we were at. I'm really sorry about that. I was talking about gathering system events when my laptop freaked. From a system event perspective, the very first thing I looked at, or the very first thing I look at as part of a system assessment, are the application event logs. When I'm looking at those, I generally look at the last 15 to 30 days. Anything that's been going on for longer than 30 days either is still going on or it's been fixed from those perspectives. We look at the server configuration to make sure that it meets Microsoft specifications, processor, memory, drives, things of that nature, operating system and service pack level. Are there any available updates? One of the things we see on a really regular basis is servers that have not been patched either from a SharePoint perspective or from an operating system perspective. And finally, we look at the Hive. We look at the 14 or the 15 Hive, depending on what version of SharePoint that we're evaluating. It might be the 12 Hive if it's 2007. And we're looking for features, any custom template files, custom site or custom definitions that have been pushed into the Hive, into any of those locations. And DocKit pulls a tremendous amount of this information out automatically. It eliminates that need to go out and do that manual evaluation that we used to do. So the way it used to be, what I used to do is I'd go in and manually review the previous 15 to 30 days application event logs. So you have to go into each server, access the application event logs, filter the application event logs, and then go through the application event logs and capture those items that you want to look at. Then we go back and review a sample of the SharePoint trace logs, looking for errors, anything that may be a red flag that could cause us problems as part of a migration, or it could be that we're looking for things that are not configured as they should be. We'd go through central administration manually to identify things like the web applications and site collections and databases and database sizes. Visually review the SharePoint farm. So we go out and look at the farm. This is something we still have to do because we want to see, in a lot of cases, what web parts are in use, what services are being used, is there any branding, have there been any customizations applied to the site specifically that were not reflected in a report. And then finally, we document the findings of the assessment. And we use those documentation. It might be the base of an upgrade migration strategy. It might be a health and usage analysis, or what we're doing more and more here lately is we're using our assessments as the basis of a SharePoint roadmap. Where am I at today and where do I want to be in a year, in 3 years, and in 5 years? Think of it as your 3 to 5 year plan. So what I do now, and this is where I'm allowed, and there's a couple of things we'll talk about DocKit specifically here in a minute when we get to the demo, but what I do now is once I've installed DocKit, depending on how I install it, there's essentially 3 ways I can install DocKit. I can install it and use a database to capture and contain information, which is really the recommended way. There's a lot of functionality that you don't get, for example, that you don't get if you don't use a database. For example, the Site Explorer functionality doesn't work, right? Because that information is captured and contained in a database for reporting. So I load the bits, install it, configure it to run with the database, make some changes to the configuration of DocKit, the default configuration, because there's things I want to pull, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit, and then I'll do what we call load the SharePoint farm. Loading the SharePoint farm goes out and essentially runs a set of queries against your SharePoint environment using PowerShell behind the scenes, and then loads that information into a set of reports in the interface. Now, this can take an incredibly long time if you have a very large farm. I ran it for a customer yesterday on a farm that had about 30 or 40 site collections, I guess it was, but it's a lot of content in those site collections, and I was actually doing it down at the list object level, so it took about an hour and a half to run. So if you have a large farm, you have to plan accordingly. I would do this on the weekend when it's outside of business hours and run it at that time. Once I have loaded the SharePoint farm, it automatically generates a ridiculous number of reports. There's over 500 reports that you can look at, access, and export directly in the interface. It's easy to navigate, and it's very intuitive, although there are some things that you need to know exactly where they are. Once we've gone and we've generated all these reports, I can review and evaluate my farm from one interface. I don't have to go back and forth between servers. I don't have to jump around between central administration and the website. It's really, really, think of it as all-in-one shopping. And then that allows me to not only build my farm assessment, but as part of that farm assessment, I can generate the entire configuration of the customer SharePoint farm. In that documentation, I can look at the custom solutions. I have the ability to export the WSPs if I choose to do so. I can save the farm configuration as an AutoSP installer XML output for disaster recovery purposes. If my farm crashes and I need to rebuild it, it's not a 100% solution, but it's pretty cotton-picking close to having my server back up and running in a very short period of time, as opposed to going back and trying to rebuild it manually from either my documentation or any other documentation that I may have. So one of the other things we look at with DocKit, besides assessments, is configuration management or change management. And a lot of customers, when we talk to them about configuration management in SharePoint or change management in SharePoint, they look at us and go, what or why? Why would I want to do configuration management in SharePoint? Primarily because I want visibility and I want consistency in my farm. I want stability and predictability and auditability in my farm. I want to be able to know. If someone comes to me and says, Jay, what service applications are we running and who has access to them, or what organizations are using them, I should be able to come back and give them that information so that it is up to date and current. And unless you have a farm configuration document that you're editing manually and treating as a living document, then you're probably not getting that, or you don't have it, right? So we can use DocKit to do things like it'll actually go out and run a configuration report on a scheduled basis, and then it will email me the results of that report when it's complete. That to me is huge. I can take a snapshot of my farm once a week, and then I can compare those snapshots so that they tell me what has changed from week 1 to week 2. That's extremely important for a lot of folks. Very, 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 very important to a lot of folks. Change management. I want to know what's changed Change management, configuration management, just a little bit different. Configuration management, change management is really a part of configuration management, right? We want to manage the configuration of our farm. We want to know what's going on where, what's been installed, what permissions have been set, what groups exist. Do we have orphaned users? I want to monitor my farm health. I want to track changes and compare. If I'm making changes to my farm, and this is really something that more people should do, but they don't, is there should be a configuration change board, a CCB or a change configuration board, however you want to term it, that goes through, evaluates those changes that are being proposed to your farm, and then recommends whether they should be implemented or not. This is especially true, I'll give you an example of cumulative updates. The conventional wisdom around cumulative updates is don't install them unless they fix an issue that you are experiencing. Now, there are some organizations that don't care if you're experiencing the issue. They view it as a patch, and as such, that patch must be installed. All right, so there should be a change configuration board that goes through and says, do we need to install this patch? What are the ramifications of installing this patch, right? And then we're going to install it. What happened? What's the backout plan? And those are all things that are part of change management. And DocKit allows us to track a tremendous amount of that stuff automatically. We can report on site contents, configuration and usage. And you're going to see all of this here in just a few minutes. Proactive versus reactive. There's nothing worse than being reactive, in my opinion. Reactive means your hair's on fire and something is generally going wrong. And I don't like working in that mode. We want to work in a proactive stance. We want to know when someone comes and asks us a question, we want to know the answer. We don't want to have to go out and scramble around and search for it. And DocKit allows us to do a lot of that. As I mentioned, automatically. We have email alerts, so we can get emails based on configuration settings in DocKit. We can do subscription settings where I can tell it I want subscription to run every day at noon, or I want it to run once a week at noon. I have some delivery options. I can email. I can also save my reports to a file share. I can set retention policies for my reports, and all of this can run as a Windows service. You may notice in the screenshots it actually says that the service is not available to users with a consultant license. Tony's very graciously provided a consultant licensing option for those of us that just need DocKit for a one-off organizational evaluation. I recommend to all my customers that they purchase it. It's one of the first recommendations that I generally make. But the running as a service provides us these 4 items that give us the ability to be proactive when it comes to managing our farm. So we can get email alerts, and we can have our reports either emailed directly to us or saved to a file share. And our reports that will run on a scheduled basis. I don't have to go out and do it manually. I don't have to worry about, you know, it's Monday, I've got to go out and run this report, and I've got to go out and do this and that. It'll all run automatically for me, and to me that's a huge benefit. From a migration standpoint, DocKit helps me do a lot of things that a lot of people don't think of. And we refer to them as the C's of migration. The first one is identify and clean up. Clean up the stale, the outdated, and the dead. And DocKit will help you identify all of those items. It'll help you identify the items that haven't been touched in X number of days. You can write queries that say, I want to see all the documents that have, you know, the last modified date. I want to see documents that meet these parameters. And we can look at the stuff that's been what I consider to be stale, and that's an organizational decision. And that may mean that a document has been touched in 6 months. It may mean that a document hasn't been touched in a year or 3 years. And the dead. Document's been uploaded, never been touched. There's no versions. Microsoft will tell you that you should keep a minimal number of versions with your documents. This is another way to identify those versions so that you can clean them up. Identify and locate your third-party or custom solutions and or features. DocKit will help you very easily not only identify and locate the third-party stuff, but if you've deployed them using WSPs, you can actually extract the WSPs. Another huge benefit. A lot of times you go into an organization, or you may be in a position where you've deployed something that somebody wrote, but the custom code no longer exists, or you can't find it. Maybe they left the company and took that code with them. It wasn't archived so that you have it available, and you're fixing to do an upgrade from 2010 to 2013. You need to be able to evaluate that code, how it's going to work in 2013, and whether changes need to be made to it. If you don't have that, then getting it can be very difficult. This simplifies that process. I mentioned earlier workflows. Workflows are a big one because we see a lot of customers. That's one of the things they want. You go in, the first thing they say, we want workflows. We're not automating our processes near enough, and we need to improve on that. But finding them in SharePoint, unless you can write the PowerShell scripts to do it yourself, is not extremely easy. Again, in the Site Explorer functionality of DocKit, I can actually drill down into the lists or the sites and look at the workflows, the number of workflows that are currently running, as well as the workflow associations. Remember, I mentioned those. That's your task list, your workflow task list, and your workflow history list. I can review features and web parts and custom templates. That's part of the cleanup. And then the last one really goes back to communication. DocKit is a great piece to add to your communication with your site owners and your site collection administrators. You can scope it so that it runs it specifically at the site collection site. So you may have a site collection owner that comes to you and wants to know certain information about their site. You can run the report directly against that, export it to an Excel spreadsheet, Word doc, PDF, and provide it to them. So demos. Real quick demo. What I've got here is I've got a 4-server SharePoint farm built. View full screen. There we go. I've got a 4-server SharePoint farm. It's got actually it's 6 servers. I've got a domain controller and a SQL box, and I've got 4 SharePoint servers. I have loaded SP.kit directly on the farm, and I've taken a few steps in preparation for the webinar today. I've actually gone ahead and loaded the farm settings because that does take some time. This particular farm's got about 18 hostname site collections. It took probably 10-15 minutes. I've gone out and created some workflows and some things of that nature. So when I do a SharePoint farm assessment, the first thing I do is come in and go to the monitoring tab. And it's going to go out, and you can see on the left-hand side, I have the option to load all events, event logs, or ULS. Typically, I spread these out, and I'll just go and load the ULS and event logs individually. On the right-hand side, I can specify the date range. If I want to look at the events for the last 7 days, I can automatically just hit the drop-down, select 7 days. It selects my date range automatically. I can filter servers. In this case, I am showing all the servers, as you can see. What level? Now, because this is ULS, I can actually filter out the stuff that I don't want to see. If I want to take out the informationals, and we'll take out the monitorables and click OK, it'll remove those objects and clean up my view. So if I wanted to see just criticals, I can actually come in here, unselect level, select all. We come down here. I want to see the criticals, say OK, and all it's going to show me is the criticals, and then I can come back and say, okay, I'm showing the criticals. Let's just show the criticals on SP1301. As you can see, it's going to filter out the criticals showing on just this particular server. Then I can also come in here and edit the sources, the various sources for my error messages. I'm just going to leave that at all. All right, so up here on the event logs, we can do very much the same thing. I can come in here. In this case, I'm going to look at the last 14 days of my event logs. I only want to see the warnings, the verbose, the criticals, and the errors. I don't want to see the informationals. And then I'm going to leave the sources all. And so when I'm doing my evaluation, I can come through here, select a specific error, and then if I want to take that information, example, this is a health analyzer error that says the memory usage on the phone, on the machine. Current server is running low on memory, which is not a surprise. It only has like 3.5 gigabytes of memory. So I could actually come in here and address these. If I wanted to report this, I can come in, copy this information, drop it into my own report, or if I want to, I can export this report as an Excel file, tell it to open the generated file, and it's going to open up my event files. It's going to give me all my event logs and warnings. And now I can come in here, evaluate these, pull out the ones that I want to identify the ones I want to report to the customer, and use that to build my report. You notice I also have the option to export as a doc or export as a PDF. Now, one of the things I didn't mention when I started talking about this, I probably should have. Before I load the farm the first time, I go into options, and this is where I can make some changes about how I want things to be reported in DocKit. I can set it to use verbose logging by default. I can set the maximum number of site collections to show in the topology report, the principles to generate data for, the number of query results per site collection, updates. But the one I get to is we come down here to, there's my service settings. I can actually come in here and identify where I want to save my snapshot to. My default load options, all right? So here I can set the load depth. Do I want to load things to the site collection level and nothing below that? Do I want to load things to the sub-site level, nothing below that, lists or list items? You notice I selected list items. I've told it to load personal sites, my farm settings with the exception of installed programs and available updates, although I can do that. My SQL Server information, my IIS settings, my features and solutions and permissions. Now, by default, workflows and content types are not selected. If I want to pull the content types and workflows in the farm, I have to select content types first and then the workflows. And finally, very important down here at the bottom, the load performance. If your SharePoint farm is limited on resources, it's a real good idea to maybe bump this down a little bit. If your SharePoint server has plenty of resources, you can actually bump this up to high performance and it will load a little bit quicker. My load target, I can load the farm, I can load the web application, I can load the site collection, or I can load specific subsites. If I want to load a specific web application, I can select the web application and then come down here, that's not the one I want, and then select the specific SharePoint web application that I want the load to target. I can monitor the load. This is where I can go in and set my defaults for my US logs and my Windows logs. Again, I can dictate some of the resource usage, and I can come down here and specify some of the event collection intervals. My data retention. Now you're going to notice that the service settings, the data retention, this is where I can come in and say remove old data from the SP.kit database, delete data more than 6 months, delete data older than a month, remove snapshots that are more than 3 months, and then I can actually limit the size that the space takes up on the server. My subscription settings, my email settings, my email alerts. You'll notice that email alerts, the data retention, and the service settings are all tied to the service, which is not available with the license that I'm currently using. And then I can make some customizations on how I'm going to compare my farm. And I can come in here and select, say, if I'm doing a farm comparison, I say, well, you know what, I'm not using apps in my farms. I can uncheck that box. so that that particular aspect is not compared when I do my farm comparison. All right. So once I have done the monitoring, once I've gone in and looked at all my event logs and my US logs, I come back to the Farm Explorer and I start going through and looking at the individual configuration of the farm. Now, at this point, if I just wanted to see the configuration of the farm, I could actually come up here, generate my report. What is it doing? Every time I type in that second L, it wants to lock my browser. All right, so now I can name it Demo Farm Full. I'm going to browse. I'm going to leave it in my Documents folder here. And you'll notice the first time you save it, it's going to save it as an SPD farm file, SP.kit farm file. This means I can go back and actually load this farm file. So we're going to save it as a farm file first. Tell it OK. Now, once I come in here, I have 3 options for my documentation. I can select all, which is going to come through here and select all 154 items that SP.kit goes out and collects. I can select what they call regular documentation, which is going to load 49 of those 154, or then I can do simple documentation, which is essentially just the farm configuration, or 24 items of that 154. I always do all. Then I can come in here to the documentation outline and I can make changes. I can move up. I can change the order that I want these items to be displayed in my report so that it's custom for me or custom for my specific customer. All right, so I could, if I wanted to move monitoring above system settings, I come in here, highlight it, and just click the up button and hit monitoring, and we can make those changes. Options, I add extra spacing after each heading, and then if I did have passwords, I could include passwords in the document. I don't recommend this. If I create a custom load, if I come in here and take the time to go through all the nodes and then select what I want to display in my report, I can actually save that selection, and then in future loads I can just come down and you actually see it saved here, and I can come in and select. If I did a J's custom selection, you would actually see that available in the drop down here. All right, so I've selected all I'm going to tell it to generate. I'm going to leave it as Demo Farm Full for my Word document. I'm going to click Save. The length of time this takes is directly related to the options that you have selected in the configuration of DocKit. You'll notice I went in and selected content types and workflows because I want those items to be available in the Site Explorer. So it may take a little bit longer when that runs in that particular context. If I'm doing just a simple load of the farm configuration, it'll only take a couple of minutes. And this is the generated report. What? Let's see why I did that. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to close that, and we'll accept later. All right, so now you notice I've got my farm configuration on the right hand, or on the left hand side rather. I've actually got my navigation, so I can come in here and click. It'll take me to my location. And you can see I clicked on database files. Now it gives me all the information about my database file. I've got the file type. I've got the path to where the file is located, the MDF file is located, what server it's running on, what the file growth is set to. So in this case, if I had adjusted the file growth, you would actually see the file growth probably still be set to megabytes, but here under file growth value, it might be set to 250 megabytes so that the database grows 250 megabytes each time a document is uploaded. My file size in megabytes and then the max file size. You'll notice it does not give you the auto growth value for the log files, but that is what it is. right? So the documentation in the report is extremely thorough. It's really nice. If I want to, I come in here, I can copy these tables out of the document for dropping into any kind of report that I'm manually creating. Generally, I take this document and save it and provide it to my customers as their farm configuration document. Now, the other thing I can do in here that I really like, I'm going to come down here to the Site Explorer. And this is going to let me explore the contents of each of my site collections. And you can see I've actually gone here. I mentioned I created some workflows. Now, if I come in here, I can come in here and look at the web application features that are configured for the farm. I can look at the people picker settings. This can be really important. It's going to tell me my custom filters, my Active Directory search timeout, allow local accounts, distribution list search domains. So if I had any additional domains, they would show up here. My web config files. This is really nice. This will let me do a comparison of my web config files to see if they're all the same. It's going to take a second because it's looking at all my config files on, there's the config file for this particular server, right? Now if I go in and I start drilling down, or for this particular web application, I'm sorry. If I start drilling down, I'm going to drill down into the products. This is my product site collection. Again, these are hostname site collections. You can see that these are the features that are deployed in the site. You see that the ones that are active have been checked. So we've got document sets, and we've got limited access user permissions, reporting, publishing infrastructure is turned on, site collection features are on, video and rich media, and workflows are turned on. I can look at the solutions that have been deployed for this particular site collection. You'll notice there's no data for this report because I have not deployed any solutions in here. My content type hierarchy, this actually show me a structure of where the content types are in use at within this site collection, right? Really, really nice, because how many times have you gone to delete a content type and it says it's in use somewhere and you can't find where it's at? I can come look for it here. Under the site collection itself, I have content type uses. This is going to tell me where my specific content types are at and where they're in use, what lists they're in use on. Features, again, these are features that are turned on in the site collection. Here's the one I really like. Here's my workflows. You can see here I have one workflow. I have one association count for an approval workflow. These are the workflow templates that are available in this site collection. It is these are just 2010 because I don't have 2013 workflow installed. I'm running one association, and then you can see I have 8 instances of this workflow running. And then I can come down here and look at my workflow associations. There's my document library. My workflow settings, can I start it manually? Can I start it on item created or when item is updated? And then it also shows my workflow history list and my task lists. Now, if you think back about creating workflows, you can create a default. You can either use the default history list and task list, or you can create custom lists. So if there are any custom lists, this is really good to know. And here, if I had additional workflows on other document libraries or other lists that pointed at different history or task lists, those are things I need to know as part of my migration. We have the Permissions Explorer. Again, I'm going to go down to SharePoint Hosting, and we will go to Products. On the right-hand side, I can look at the date. These are the live permissions in this particular site at this point in time. You'll notice if I expand this, I can come down here and look at permissions on other objects. Here's my document library. You can see who has permissions on the document library. If I wanted to, I could even look at the document itself. This is a good way to see who has item level permissions on items, right? We have permissions reports. This is really nice, and this is important, right? Right there, number 1, orphaned users. And I probably don't have any orphaned users, but I'm going to go in and look at the product site collection. We'll run the application, and I have no orphaned users for that site collection. But if I did, I would be able to locate them here and at least identify them, right? I can identify those users that don't have permissions. You can see these are actually two two accounts that I've created in my domain. So they don't have permissions to this particular site collection. Excuse me. I can look at unique permissions on the site collection. You'll see that the site collection images and style library both have unique permissions. My site collection hierarchy, I can drill down through that. I also have the ability over here, I have a large number of filters if I want to show all permissions. All right. Content and usage reports, this is really nice, especially from a migration standpoint. It tells me where I've got content types being used. It tells me, and again, this can go back to the site collection. It's going to look at the site collection level. Go to products again. All right. Dead documents. So these are documents that's going to come back with nothing because I don't have any documents really are dead. Storage metrics, this is nice. It comes in and tells me exactly how much space each site collection is taking up. If I'm doing database attaches and I want to move site collections around, this is really important. We have unmodified content. We come down here. I've got a site structure report. It tells me under products, again, this is scoped at the site collection level. Right? So I'm looking at products. I have no subsites underneath products. I just have my document libraries and lists out of the box. Then I come back and I look at my best practices report, and this is where I start tying the report and my assessment together. As you can see, I've obviously got some servers that need some hot fixes applied. They need 92 errors. I got some application server hot fixes that need to be applied, as in 46 of those. I've exceeded my limits by hierarchy 4 times, so server limits, and it's the number of application pools, which is pretty common. You can see under databases, the database auto growth hasn't been set for my database. My database and log files are found on the same drives, and my content database capacity. And you scroll down, disk allocation size, my temp DB is on the same disk as my other database files. My search index path, best practice, it is not on a separate drive, it is located on the C drive. And so each of these, if I click in, I can drill into the particular best practice. Example, I drilled into blob caching enabled, and you can see that I have not enabled blob caching for any of my web applications at this point in time. Go back to web applications, let's see here. Let's go back to the dashboard. Let's see here. Number of application pools. I actually come in here. You can see I've got 14 application pools on 2 servers and 13 on 2. By default, Microsoft has a supported limit of 10, and I use that term loosely. You can exceed that number of application pools, but it consumes additional resources on the server, and you may need to plan for that. The model DB talks about the MonoDB file auto growth. You can see megabytes is set to grow by megabytes, file growth value of 1. The log files are set to grow as a percentage of 10%. And so I use this best practices report to go out and look at the report that's been generated by DocKit, tie those items together so I can document those and point them out to the customer, so that they have an idea of, depending on the type of assessment, whether it's usage and health or migration or discovery, we can point out to them the areas of configuration that they need to focus on or need to address when they're either migrating to the new farm or as they go forward with the existing farm. We have queries and rules down here, really, really cool. All my checked out files, document libraries without a checkout, document libraries without versioning. You know, maybe I've got a, so I'm going to run this on SharePoint hosting. Let's say I've got a company governance plan. I've got a governance plan that says we will use versioning on all document libraries. So you can see my document libraries without versioning, the list is pretty long. You can see documents on almost every one of my sites. There's my shared documents on my contract site. my site assets on my benefits sites, form server templates on down the list. Document library without checkout required, or document library checkout required, and then version history. I can also write new rules and new queries. So let's do a new query first. We'll just call it query. I'm going to scope it to lists. I'm going to go next. And these are all the variables, the fields that I can query against, right? So is content approval required? Is checkout required? Is quick edit enabled? Is offline? What's the major version limit, the minor version limit? Is there a list template? Last modified, item count. That's a big one for me. I want to know where my large items are at. Does it have an external data source? That's a good one to know. If you move something, if you're doing a migration, you move something that has an external data source, you have to make sure that the external data source resides in the farm you're moving to. Display it on the quick launch. Created. Let's see, attachments enabled appear in search, right? So I'm just going to say select all. We'll go next. It's going to give me, I can go in here and I can set the order and sorting. I can do this manually. I can do it automatically. If I do it automatically, I have to have the service enabled. But if the service was enabled, I could actually go in, set this to run on a specified recurrence. I can run it daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly. I can set the date and the time, and then I can actually specify the email address that I want to mail it to. I'm not going to filters. I could create filters here with flags. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say run. We'll say finish. And it didn't find anything for some reason. There we go. All right, so now I've run my query. You can see there's my document library. And then I can actually require content approval. And then I can come up here and I can actually filter on each one of these fields. And once I've done that, what can I do? I can export it as a PDF or a spreadsheet or a Word document. Huge, huge benefits there. We can create rules. This I haven't played with a lot. I'm going to say I'm going to create an attachment. We're going to create a rule for attachments. Location is rules. Rule scope is against lists and types. Allow attachments in the list. This is actually going to go out and allow attachments in all of the lists. We'll do it manually. I'm not going to put any filters. We'll set the target as the web application. Run the rule. No data to show. I can come in here, if I've done snapshots, I can come in here and look at the change history. Generally, after you run your first snapshot, you get everything configured the way you want it to. You can mark it as the configuration is good and use that as your baseline. And then we've seen the monitoring piece at the very end. All right. And that is SP.kit in a nutshell. All right, so some takeaways for today, because it is 1 o'clock. We lost a few minutes because of the technical difficulty or the bonehead move on my part. I apologize for that. All right, I see that Sarah and Tony have been answering questions, which is real nice. I appreciate that. All right, so 10 takeaways. Using .kit, the first thing you should do after you've done the configuration, how you want to pull your reports and your information, you probably want to establish a baseline configuration, capture it like I did, then mark the configuration as good. You'll find that using that as your baseline, then you can track your changes as they occur in the farm. Use your best practices report in the Site Explorer to locate objects that could critically impact a migration or an upgrade. Really important. Things like content types, workflows, templates. One of the things I didn't look at, but you can see is if you look at the site collection list, it will actually tell you the templates that were used to create the site collections. The assessment I ran yesterday actually showed a large number of Fab 40s in the farm that I'm currently working with for the customer. Use the extract WSP functionality to download solutions you may not have the source code to. Save the farm configuration as an AutoSP XML configuration file. Really, really important, really, really big addition to the tool. This takes DocKit from a configuration management, change management, assessment type tool, in my opinion, and adds the ability to be a disaster recovery type tool as well. If we generate an XML configuration file that AutoSP installer can use every time you generate a new snapshot, then you will have the latest and greatest. Make the selections to capture workflows, content types, and solutions in the default load options tab of the configuration options. SharePoint objects are often linked together. Remember, we talked about that with workflows. Remember that if you're moving things like workflows, you must have the history and the list, the tasks, the workflow history, the workflow task list. You must also have, for example, external data types, external data connections. Make sure you capture those. Use the snapshot functionality to automatically generate SharePoint's configuration reports. Absolutely. Huge benefit to me, saves me a lot of time, is the ability to capture my Windows application event logs and US logs in a single location. If I'm in a farm that has 20 servers, it can take me an incredibly long time to go through and hit every server and hit every event log and review them. If I can pull those all into a single location, go through them in one place, my life is good. Use permission reports to identify orphan groups, orphan users, groups without users, or user-specific permissions, item-level permissions. Remember, the last thing, and I see a question about this in the question box, DocKit does not have to be installed. It can actually run it without installing it on the server. Now, what you should be aware of is if you run it that way, you're not going to be able to attach it to a database and you're going to lose some functionality. But it does give you the ability to go in, run the tool, and generate a baseline configuration of the farm. Things like the site collection explorer, the site explorer won't be available, but the basic functionality of the tool is. Okay, I want to thank everybody. Let's do this real quick. I'm going to take a few minutes. We've got about 7 minutes of time left. Robin actually sent me a question from earlier. In case you want to try and fit it in, okay, off-the-wall question, were certain SharePoint 2013 business intelligence features that aren't functional if one is using SQL aliasing? Is there a reference that describes this? That's a good question, Sergio. I don't know. I've never heard that. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not a big BI guy, but I'll ask my business intelligence folks here unless Tony has an answer or Sarah. But I'll ask my BI guys here and I can cover it in the blog post next week. Okay, Garrett, any requires for the account executing DocKit? Yes. The account executing DocKit must be a farm administrator and it must have DB creator and security admin on the SharePoint SQL server. And that really should be all that you know. It looks like different, can this product compare between different SharePoint versions and farms? Tony, that's probably a question for you. I don't think I've ever tried to compare different farms or different versions. I wouldn't think that the comparison would work very well given the difference in functionality between 2010 and 2013 and 2007 and 2010.
Hello, this is Tony. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Tony, I can hear you.
Hi. So yeah, for people that want to compare between different farms, let's say when they're planning an upgrade or migration or something like that, they can do mapping between different things. So if they have different URLs or different names applications, databases, and things like that, they can do mapping. Of course, if they're comparing that's like something that's really different, like let's say SharePoint 2007 versus SharePoint 2013, then some parts will be missing, but you would still be able to compare the core features like web applications, site collections, and stuff that hasn't changed that much over the years.
Okay, good deal. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Okay, we got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I appreciate everybody attending today, taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy day for all of you. It means a lot to me. I know it means a lot to Tony and Sarah as well. Remember that everybody that has attended today receives a discount of 30% off a dock kit, and that's really a big deal. This is probably the most affordable tool on the market that I'm aware of and does the most. And you also receive 30% off of our Summit 7 Systems Anchor Point support. Anchor Point, again, is our SharePoint help desk. We do a lot of different things with it, everything from writing workflows to looking at issues within your farm. One randomly chosen winner right now looks like about a 1 in 30, 32, 33 chance will receive a free license of dock kit and 16 hours of SharePoint support. Good luck to everybody with that. The winner will be notified via email. If you have any questions about dock kit sales or support, you can contact Sarah and Tony and their team at support@accelratio.net. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to take all of the questions that were submitted, and we will do our best to answer those in a blog post. It'll probably be the middle of end of next week, as I am teaching a class next week. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great day and a safe and happy holidays coming up.